Yeah. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Carson. This is Leslie. We're here at Goodwin House, Alexandria, and we're going to go over our part 2 in our Getting Up and Off the Floor series. Today, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about some exercises that you can do that are going to complement the first part of the series that we went over in terms of getting from a standing position to a position all the way on our back. Today is going to be a little bit more just about those exercises, not necessarily the positions that we're getting up and off the ground, the movement for, but trying to help strengthen those muscles that can actually help us perform the actions of getting up and down and off the floor here. So we're going to go over a couple of different exercises first, starting from a standing position, and we're going to give you some modifications that you can use, either using a chair or even using a wall, and some without any assistance whatsoever. So the first thing we're going to start off with here is going to be a body weight squat, where we're not having any assistance at all. We're just going to pretty much stand free floating and just going to go up and down. What we want to do whenever we squat is make sure that our heels stay on the floor, and you want to make sure that your weight sinks into your heels as well as the ball of your foot, and your toes stays flat on the floor and pushing through the heels on the way up. Something you will see Leslie demonstrate here is that she does allow her hips to extend back as needed and allows her knees to bend. Another thing that you'll be able to see if Leslie faces forward is that her knees aren't going to cave in. In fact, she's going to keep her knees in line with the laces of her shoes here. What we don't want to have our knees buckling in at all. It's going to close off our hip, and at a certain point, you can't even continue to squat if that's what's going on, but it also puts a lot of torque and stress on our knees. We don't want to do that here. So the other thing we're going to do is we're also keeping our upper body nice and upright as well. Our chest is not facing towards the floor, it's relatively facing forward. And we're making sure that we are bending at the knees, pushing the hips back as needed to keep our weight from shifting too far forward. Again, for the majority of these exercises where we're going to use repetitions to kind of count how many times you should do a set or so of these, anywhere from 10 to 15 is great. So what we're going to do is show you another modification where you can do this holding a chair or using a chair as some assistance. You can imagine also a wall being at your side or being in front of you, and you can use a wall as well to help out. So again, if you need to, using a chair, it's the same thing. Standing back with the hips as needed, allowing the knees to bend, making sure that you're trying to, and if you can use the back of that chair, it can also help you keep your chest and your upper body nice and upright while we're going up and down throughout our squatting positions here. Now, if you want to, if you're using a chair as well, we can also squat up and down from the chair. So you can go from a seated position here, and this way you can actually measure out if whether or not we're squatting down far enough, because we want to definitely have the strength and the range of motion to be able to squat with control at least as far down as it would take for you to sit down completely and to stand up from a position where your hips are level with your knees. As you can imagine, if you use a chair that's lower, that's a little bit lower to the ground where your hips end up being a little bit lower than the knees, it'll make it a little bit more difficult. But ideally, we definitely want to be able to get to a place where we can sit down at a place where our hips are level with our knees and being able to stand up from this position here as well. And again, same number of repetitions, and you can always do a couple or a few sets of these for any of the exercises that we're going to be going on. Another variation that you'll find yourself in, it's probably a little bit more common than just a squat, it's a split squat, it's a staggered stance. So what you do here is when you do set up for a split squat, you have 1 foot forward, 1 foot is back, but you want to make sure that you don't tightrope your position at all. You want to make sure that you have space, not just lengthwise, but widthwise. I always say, imagine that you're standing inside of a rectangle and you want to fill up the opposite corners of the rectangle. When we're doing our split squat, we want to make sure the back heel is up off the floor and that our heel is not turned in, it's turned out. So that way both feet are faced in the same direction. And that way we can keep our pelvis facing the same way that our shoulders are facing here. Both knees are bent. And so in this position here, your back knee is just gonna bend straight down towards the floor. Weight, you're gonna push through the heel of that front foot as much as you possibly can. And that back leg almost acts as a kickstand there, and it keeps you from leaning back or falling back. Now, from the side here, you're gonna be able to see the position Leslie has is when she's starting off, the knee is just on top of the ankle, maybe even slightly behind. What we do want to avoid is we want to avoid the knee starting off already forward past the ankle, because that can put a little too much strain for when we do bend down, it'll push the knee too far forward. And it'll make it difficult for us to put weight in the heel of that forward foot here. Now, when you do repetitions of this exercise, make sure that whatever you do for one side, you always do for the other, and make sure that you switch it up. And you might notice that when you do switch it up, one side might be a little bit easier than the other, or you might notice that one side has a little bit more clearance, or you might feel like you have a little bit greater range of motion. As best you can, always try to keep things as even as you possibly can. And again, making sure that you're paying close attention to where the knee, that front knee is, allowing that back knee to bend down towards the floor. And only squat down to a depth where you feel comfortable. And again, if this is something new for you, grab a wall. You can even grab a chair, and you can use a chair to help with this as well, where you're just holding onto a chair as you go through your repetitions as well, and set up real close to it if you need to. And it's the same thing. You're not going to change anything at all. That back knee still bends straight down. Make sure you're paying real close attention to where that front knee goes from the setup. The other way we can do this is you would set up from a seated, as if you were going to be using the chair, as if you were seated here, and you're going to get into a position here where the back leg is the outside leg, and you're going to have that knee, you want to make sure that that guy is bent and already in a good position with the big toe and the ball of the foot firmly placed onto the floor, and paying attention to where the heel of the front leg is in relation to that front knee. Very slowly, using the arm of that chair, you're going to start to bear weight in your feet as you push up through the heel and through the ball of the foot of the back leg. And the same thing here, using the chair as needed. And if you want to, you can go all the way down to a seated position, or you can just go to a point where you're just touching the seat, or it's just kind of there for more of a secure position where you feel like if you need to, you can easily sit down. Same thing, just for that exercise. Again, if it's a unilateral exercise, you want to make sure that whatever reps you do for one side, that we're going to be doing those reps for the other side. Just like that. So just a quick recap of all the squats that we've done is we've done some body weight squats without any help. Again, what's important is we're setting up with our feet shoulder width apart. We're extending our hips back as needed, making sure that we're keeping weight in our heels, our chest is up and open, and our shoulders are rolled back, and that back is straight. We've shown you some variations where you can do this using a chair. You can squat down with a chair and have the seat ready for you. You can pop up and down, or you can completely go from a seated position to standing. And then we've done our split squat variations as well. And that one's going to challenge your balance to a greater extent. Now, the other thing we're going to do from a standing position here is called a good morning. So this is a hip hinging movement. So what this is going to focus on is hip extensions. This is really going to work our glutes and our hamstrings and our lower back. And what we want to make sure is that we are keeping our head above the level of our heart when we do this here. Now, you still want to set your feet up shoulder width apart. And when you do this exercise, it's not a straight leg exercise. We want to make sure that our knees are slightly bent. And then we'll hinge forward. Now, you can either place your hands on your hips, you can cross them over your chest, or you can hold your hands just touching the back of your head. Now you're going to hinge to the point where you can still keep your head above the level of your heart, but notice that Leslie's back is nice and straight and that the knees are just slightly bent, but they don't continue to bend. We're keeping our hips up high. The only movement that's really occurring is around the hip joint. You're going to slowly bring yourself back up, and you should feel your hamstrings working, your glutes working in that lower back. Now, and keeping your core tight, making sure that you are breathing throughout. We're not holding our breath, and don't go down and up too fast either. Make sure you're going nice and easy because we don't want to get lightheaded. Again, making sure that you're paying attention to where you start, your knees are slightly bent, and just hinging over at the hip. Again, you can have your hands on your hips, you have your hands crossed over your chest, or even having your hands just touching the back of your head with your elbows out, and that can add a little bit more resistance to you. Now, next thing we're going to do here is we're going to work on a little bit of the upper body as well as our core. So we're going to do some plank variations from a weight-bearing position where we're not going to be down on the floor. We're going to be primarily utilizing the chair here. So first one that we're going to do is it's an exercise that we call it's a plank walkout. So if you do have some difficulty doing a plank, whether it's from your weight bearing on your hands or on your forearms, but for some reason or the other it's the arms and your shoulders that are fatiguing, it's that upper body. One exercise that you can do that can kind of help build some of that muscular endurance and that strength is doing a walkout where you're just kind of temporarily putting yourself in that weight bearing position. As Leslie is going to describe, from using a straight arm position here from the seat of the chair, she's going to start off in this position here where her feet are underneath her hips, and then one at a time, keeping her weight forward, shifted on towards her hands, she's going to walk one foot back out to a straight leg position just for a brief moment, and then she's going to walk her feet right back in. So you go from a loaded plank position with your legs extended to now having a little bit more weight supported on your legs when you walk them back forward. And you're going to do this for a time duration here. More importantly is when you're in that fully extended position with your legs straight, you want to make sure you can draw a straight line through the shoulders, the hips, the knees, and the ankles. You don't want the hips to dip down, and you don't want to hike the hips up too high either. It should be nice and straight. Again, you're keeping your core nice, pulled in and tight. You are breathing, not holding your breath. And always make sure that you're breathing. And again, make sure that you're keeping your shoulders over those hands.
Yeah, don't sink into the shoulders.
Oh, and don't sink into your shoulders.
Yeah.
You want to stay up and keep those active shoulders. Your shoulders are working here. So now, if you do want to make this a little bit more difficult, you can do the same thing, but from a position on your forearms. It's the same thing. You load up on your forearms. Now, it will require a little bit more flexibility in terms of you getting down while you're still on your feet here. You have to bend over a little bit more, but that's okay. This is also a good position to get comfortable with doing if you're going to get down off the floor using a chair. And again, the same thing here is we're going in and out of a position where we're a little bit more weight bearing on the shoulders here. What's difficult with planks is they do require a lot of upper body strength. And the other thing that you can do to kind of help things out as well is whenever you do any plank variation, you can also spread your feet out a little bit, put a little width there, and that can help take a little bit of the weight off of the shoulders as well. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is push-ups. So push-ups are always a great upper body exercise to do as well. The other thing we can do is we have different positions on the chair that we can use. That's going to help increase the angle of our body in relation to the floor, which is going to make things easier. The more parallel you are to the floor, the more weight you are going to be bearing on your shoulders. So whether it's going to be at the top portion using the back of the chair, you can do push-ups from here. You can use them from the side of the arm. Whatever you're using, make sure that, kind of give it a little pressure first. Make sure that the chair isn't kind of tabletop over. Whatever you're using, make sure that It's stable and it's not going to go anywhere. Or you can do them from the seat of the chair. The lower you are to the floor, the more difficult it's going to be. Now, regardless of where you decide to do your push-ups, same thing as if you were getting ready to go into a plank position, you'd come down into a plank with your arms straight, you'd walk those feet back. And when we do our push-ups, keeping our core nice and tight, it's as if we were just going to hang there, but the only thing that should move is just around the elbow joint and the shoulder joint. And you don't want to shrug. You want to allow your shoulders to descend towards your hands, leading with the shoulders, letting your hips follow. You don't want your hips to droop down when you push back up or even when you're coming down. And you don't want to do push-ups with your hips hiked up either. You want to try to, again, maintain that plank position as best you can here. Now, really important is when we do push-ups, no matter how wide your hands are, we don't want to internally rotate our arms. When you internally rotate your arms, when you do a push-up, or when the eccentric part, when your hands when you're coming closer towards your hands, is it'll force you to shrug, and it closes off the space that's inside of our shoulder joint. We want to preserve that space as much as we possibly can. So we want to keep that arm externally rotated, that upper arm. That's another way of saying, let's squeeze those elbows a little bit to our sides and don't let your elbows wing out. So when you're in a push-up position, on the way down, think about slow, keeping your core tight, squeezing those elbows towards your sides a little bit, and then push through the palm of your hand. And as long as you lowered yourself down to a good position, keeping your arms in a good place, those arms are going to be slightly externally rotated. It'll also keep you from shrugging. It'll help activate the musculature in our shoulders, and it'll keep that space in our shoulder joint nice, and it'll help preserve that space that's in the shoulder joint. And that's going to help us stay away from any kind of impingement or any friction within the shoulder, or exacerbating any conditions or any issues you might already be dealing with. Now again, if the wider that your arms are, the more your elbows will come out, but you can still emphasize the same cue, but just to a lesser extent. Now we're going to go ahead and take a seat on the chair. That's going to pretty much conclude our standing exercises. For the rest of the time here, we're going to work our way down towards the floor and give you some floor exercises. But let's say that we're going to go ahead and utilize some movements here from just trying to slide off of our chair onto the floor. So there's a few ways that we can do this. Kind of like where you're setting up to do a split squat off the side of the chair. You can set up on your side to easily lower yourself down to the floor. And again, from here, what's nice is the outside leg is back behind you already. So that way the inside hip, the hip that's closest to the chair, when you come down, that's going to be the hip that you would bring your body weight towards if you were going to try to come down to the side of your hip, provided you didn't want to bear a lot of weight on the knee. You can come down towards the hip up to the point of being on the side. The other thing you can do is, starting from the chair again here, is you can just come down one at a time onto both knees. And you can go from a position where you're on your knees to being onto your hands. And then from here, it gets a lot easier into being able to get onto your side and then to roll onto your back. Those are just a couple ways that we can get onto the floor from the chair here. Same thing for getting back up. It is going to require a little bit of upper body strength. So this is why we're going to be doing some of these exercises down here, starting off with our core. And we're going to be on our back in a supine position. And we're going to go over some cues here. And we're going to start off with what I call a tuck hold or a hollow hold. So in a hollow position, it's referring to the position of your spine and your pelvis. In a hollow, your pelvis is posteriorly tilted, or it's tucked back by squeezing your glutes a little bit, and your sternum is pulled down towards your pelvis up towards your sternum, and you can get that by contracting the abdominal muscles. So in this position here, a tuck hold would be is where we're going to tuck our knees towards our chest, and you can have your hands either on top of your knees or underneath the knees, whatever seems a little bit better for you to hold. And when you're in this position, you want to try to kind of like you're just cradling yourself almost. You want to get your shoulders off the floor, and you kind of want to pick up the end part of your pelvis to get up off the floor as well. Just focusing on those two things, kind of like pulling those knees up towards your chest and your chest up towards your knees, you're going to notice the abdominal muscles are having to work here. When you're in this position, make sure you're breathing, but you're still contracting the abdominal muscles. Allow the diaphragm to relax and contract, but keep those core muscles nice and tight, and just hold this for a good while, either from 10 to 20 seconds, and just think about your breathing. Making sure that you can hold the position and you can breathe independently. Now, to make this a little bit more challenging, you can go and start in the position here when you're tucked, shoulders are up, you have your pelvis, the bottom part of your pelvis is slightly up off the ground. You could slowly start to let go of your legs with your hands and move them away from a little bit, and that's going to increase the difficulty of holding this position because your hands aren't going to be able to help. Another thing that you can do as well is you can increase the position of your legs by pushing them further away from you. Now you can either extend them straight up, which can be a little bit easier, and a little bit more difficult is you can bring them out away from your body, and making sure again that you're holding, you got to maintain that hollowed position. So always pay attention. Only challenge yourself to the extent that you are able to maintain that posterior pelvic tilt and that you're able to breathe. Here's another good rule here is whether you're stretching or you're working out, if you're having trouble breathing, tone it down just a little bit. Give yourself a little bit of a break, or think about a modified version here. So we're starting off with the easiest, with your hands helping you, but you want to make sure that the shoulder blades are off the ground, the bottom part of your pelvis is up, and you're using those hands to help. The other thing you can do is if you have long legs, you barely even have to move your legs to increase the difficulty, but instead of moving your legs, you could just bring your arms out behind you, and it can challenge the upper body to a greater extent. And again, just trying to keep those shoulder blades off the ground. Now so this is a time duration. You would do, for this as an exercise, you would just, again, hold this anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds, trying to focus on breathing. Alternatively, you can do repetitions where you would go into a tucked position, and then to your, a good challenge, a level of, a good challenge that you could hold yourself in that hollow position, extending the limbs out and then bringing them back in. And you can count each one of those movements as a repetition. Keeping your core nice and tight, making sure you're breathing, not letting go of the abdomen, and even still keeping your glutes a little contracted as well. And you can start off with some slow movements and then graduate into a more lengthened position, which is going to increase the resistance that you're going to be placed on the abdomen here. This is a very good abdominal exercise, and it's so much better. It's so much more better on your back, because traditional sit-ups anchors your pelvis into the ground, and you're more likely to find yourself in an anterior tilted position, which can put compression on our lumbar spine. And in this one here, we actually get to also work the lower part of the abs, because the lower portion is actually engaged by having to bear the weight of our lower body. So it's also a more effective exercise than just doing sit-ups off of the ground here. And you also don't have to worry about pulling your head up.
Do you want your back to arch?
To arch, and we don't want the back to arch at all. Right. So this puts really good in this position here is if we're keeping our pelvis tilted back and our shoulders off the ground, it's going to push that lower back down into the floor, and it's going to prevent any arching from taking place, and it's going to keep a nice hollow position here. Again, sometimes you can find yourself in an arched position when doing sit-ups, or if your legs go out a little too far, you might feel that the pelvis starts to anteriorly tilt. So pay attention for that. That's going to let you know whether or not you're challenging yourself too much. Next thing we're going to do here is what's important about getting into this position is we're going to do a tuck and roll. So most of the times that we're going to be getting down, as we've showed you from the last, from our part 1 series of going through our positions of getting down to the floor and getting back up, we're always getting back to a hands and knees position. So we have, at some point or another, if we're on our back, we have to kind of roll over. Now, for those of you who have difficulties rolling over to your side with your shoulders, what can be easier is if you're picking up your shoulders off the ground, and you can use your hands to help, getting into this tuck position, you'll notice that it's a lot easier to roll and tilt towards the side. After turning just enough, your body weight is going to actually help do half the work for you once you tilt in the direction that you feel comfortable with, ideally on the side of your body that does not have a lot of pain, but you'll be able to roll without having to put as much effort into it. And it is a lot less labor intensive. And it'll decrease the amount of pressure that you're going to feel on your shoulder. Now, a couple of exercises you can do for this one here is you can just get into a tuck position, roll to one side, then from there roll back to your back, tuck again, and roll towards the other side. Or you can bob back and forth, provided that you don't go too slow or just kind of kicking out that elbow a little bit to help you. As long as you're not inciting any pain, that's the big thing here, is that we're paying attention and listening to our body. If our body says no, then we're not going to go that far. Next thing we're going to do here is, just like we did with the chair, is we can do some plank variations here on the floor. Now, this is going to be much more difficult than doing them on the chair. First thing we're going to start off with is a plank to a push-up position, starting off on our knees. So you would start in a arm extended position. Now, when you are on your knees, you still need to make sure that our hips are in line with the shoulders and the knees, and that they're not drooping down or hiked back too much. And one arm at a time, you're going to come down to an elbow, and then back up one arm at a time to your hands. And you're going to keep moving like this in a continuous motion for time duration. Again, anywhere from 10 seconds to 30 seconds is pretty substantial. Anywhere from 2 to 3 sets is also going to be pretty good for a single workout. You can make this more difficult by doing this on your feet. It's going to increase the load that your shoulders are going to bear. And it's going to require a little bit more core stability because you got to lower yourself down nice and easy to the forearms. So again, this is a plank to a push-up. Again, what we can do is we can also do a plank from this position as well, just holding here, or holding a plank from our forearms. So you would start on your forearms, you would bring your knees up, and then this would be probably the most challenging way for you to do a plank. Now you can also make it more challenging by bringing one leg up versus another leg. You can hold one leg up for a time duration and split up that 10 or 30 seconds between both legs, or you can keep them moving at a little pace interval and just hold and just keep moving those feet up and switching and alternating for a time duration. Last thing we can do here again is push-ups from our floor position here. So the same variations that you would do, or the same cues that we would do that I gave earlier, but the same variations that we went through with the plank, you can do this from your knees. No matter where you put your hands, whether they're wider or closer, what we don't want is we don't want our elbows to flare out and forward. We want to keep them pointed back and down a little bit and squeezed in, which is going to help us externally rotate our upper arm, and it's going to prevent us from shrugging, and it's going to prevent any internal rotation. We want to keep our core tight. More importantly is make sure that our shoulders come down towards our hands. Don't be afraid. Let your shoulders come down towards the hands and let the hips follow in kind. You don't want your hips to lead the movement, and we don't want our hips to be too scared to come with the shoulders. Everything should be moving together. Again, that's going to require us to make sure that we're engaging our abdomen, keeping our core nice and tight, and more importantly, that we're breathing. Now, you can also do this from a foot-bearing position where we bring the knees up, and this is going to increase the load on our shoulders. And again, it's the same thing here. Make sure you're breathing, keeping your core tight and your shoulders engaged. You good? So again, these are just a few exercises that we can do to help increase the strength of the muscles that we would use getting up off the floor. Again, this series didn't use any equipment. This is all calisthenics. All we did was we used a chair and a floor that we felt comfortable being able to get ourselves up and down off of. If you have any questions related to any of the content of this video or of the videos that we posted before, please contact either me or Leslie and come down and see us in the fitness center. If you want to do some of these exercises, but you're not necessarily trying to get onto the floor, you're not quite sure you want to be on the floor just yet, or you're just not ready for it, we have a therapy table that's a little bit higher up off the floor, but it'll still give you an opportunity to do some of these exercises that we have in the fitness center. Come down, you can use that. If you need help, again, reach out to either Leslie or I, and we can give you some information, or we can actually help you build a program if you're looking to do that. But in either case, both of us want to thank you for your time, and please give us any feedback that you might have. And thanks again